This is on restorative conferencing. Just want to welcome you. We say helping to repair significant harm. Usually restorative conferencing, if you remember yesterday, or actually in the introduction to restorative practices, we were talking about the continuum of restorative practices, and the very informal part of it is, we're using restorative communication and maybe some affective communication or affective statements, but now that's the informal. This is more on the formal end. Just so you know, this is when you're dealing more with significant harm. So you won't be running restorative conferences every day. You'd probably burn out. And so we'll talk about it. And the idea is that we want to increase understanding of restorative conferencing and how schools can benefit from adopting this empowering practice, increase competency and skills to facilitate restorative conferences and agreements after harm has been done, increase skills to facilitate building restorative conference agreements and a plan for support and success. All right, so we'll give it our best shot. We've only got a few hours, and usually this training is 2 days, so bear with me on that one. We can only cover so much in this time. And so we won't be watching a video today, but we're just going to use this image. And so if you would just kind of look at the image and take some restorative breaths, right? Almost like nurturing breaths where you just breathing in and out, and you're looking at the trees and the water and the peace, and you're kind of like breathing in that oxygen, almost like as if you were there, just imagining yourself being able to breathe in this pure oxygen. And it's kind of nurturing our body and our mind. And then we exhale out anything that we don't want to carry today. Anything that could be bothering you, weighing you down in some ways. So just use your breath, use your imagination, nurture yourself. And then we take a moment to just remember who we are as educators, serving our community, called to loving service of others. Just remembering it's a privilege to do what we do. All right, and then just so you know, some people will even bring in the aspect of, while they're doing a mindfulness or an opening, they'll bring in the aspect of just remembering with gratitude our ancestors who, worked hard so that we could have a better life, right? And so we remember our ancestors now and just kind of, remember that in the indigenous mentality, the ancestors are still with us, but in spirit, and encouraging us, cheering us on. And then I know some people will end up, they'll also do like a land acknowledgement sometimes. But if you were going to be doing a restorative conference, you would probably just do, could be just not even a minute maybe of just kind of breathing and just remembering, right, why we're here. All right, thank you, everybody. And then these are our same agreements from yesterday's training. Let me ask, Tracy, would you read through these, please, for us?
Sure. Community agreement offerings, confidentiality, create a safe space for all, acceptance of where people are today, brave and non-judgmental space with grace, open-mindedness to others' ideas, assume good intentions, trauma-informed approach, open communication, speak from the heart.
Thank you, Tracy. And so Now, I mean, we're in the Zoom format, so it's a little hard to see if people all would give a thumbs up. But I know you all did yesterday when you were with us, but if anybody has any problems with these, please just send us a chat, and we can maybe discuss it. We can change it. We can edit whatever. And if somebody also has an addition that they would like, you can also send that in the chat. And if we don't receive any messages in the chat, then we'll assume that you're all good, as a thumbs up, and we're all in agreement to do our best, right? To create that like brave and non-judgmental space with grace for each other. And obviously, if you were doing a restorative conference, you would definitely have some community agreements, and you want to make sure that people are in agreement. And sometimes people will even have people sign a kind of almost like a little bit of a contract where they'll have community agreements, and they specify the confidentiality part of it. And they also let them know that, help them understand that if anybody would like to leave at any time during the restorative conference, they can just let us know, and we can stop the conference if it gets to be too much. We can also take breaks. So, people kind of let people know ahead of time what's happening. And then like yesterday, we said the foundational work of building trust and respect with students and staff is essential if we're going to be effective while implementing restorative conferencing. So remember that the foundation for all effective restorative justice practices is the building trust, building that respect, building community, building relationships. It's really like the foundation of a house. And if you don't do it well, the house is going to be skewed and it's going to be weakened in some ways. So we want to make sure that schools understand the commitment to this type of work means you are going to invest in the community building and relationship building. And then, so we want to do our first little roll call like we did yesterday. Just please type in the chat your name, your school or organization, and how you're feeling, 1 through 10, where 1 means you feel awful and 10 means you feel awesome. And so now we can kind of just check how you're doing, if you don't mind. Just go ahead and put that in the chat. And today I'm feeling about an 8. I was a little, again, just really busy for some reason, so many things going on. And but I'm happy to be here. So interesting. Audrey, you say you're feeling, is it between a 6 and a 10, or what does that mean? Do you mind unmuting and letting me know?
Yeah, I feel kind of like a 6. I didn't have the best day yesterday, so I'm a little down today. That's why.
Okay. Well, now thank you, Audrey, for, just being authentic. That's what we're hoping, that people will do that with us. And in any way that we can, we send you good vibes. We send you grace and goodness for a, good afternoon with us. And then just scroll down, and so you can see how your colleagues are doing, if you don't mind. Just kind of do a quick check to see how colleagues are doing today. And if there's something that you see that calls your attention, that you feel you want to send a private message to somebody, just click on their name and it'll actually format it to send them a chat directly between you and them. So, and thank you everybody for doing this. I'm just kind of still reviewing what people are saying, and I appreciate it. Thank you. And so one thing I wanted to do was, I noticed I read through the evaluations, and we appreciate you filling out the evaluations. And one of the things that was recommended is maybe showing a few video clips. It can be helpful to people so that they can start to get a feel, at least a visual, and kind of get that feel for some of this in practice. So I'm going to do that today. I'm going to try to show you a few different clips. And one of these is this happened in an alternative school that you're going to see. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask you to kind of just, as you're doing it, as you're looking at this, try to identify ways that you think this could be helpful to some of the people in the restorative circle that you're going to be looking at. Okay. So like, just think in which way would it be helpful for the young man who's talking, but also the other people who are there with him. And so just so you know, just to give you a little context, he'll tell you. So I don't need to say that much, but basically he was caught stealing from a gift shop I think it's like a field trip to the zoo. And then so it caused a lot of ripple effects, right? The police and then the bus was waiting, and they had to leave, and then who was going to stay with this young man, and so people were all late, and it just caused also just a lot of different problems. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop the share here, and I'm going to then reshare because I have to kind of get to it. And then, all right, so you're going to hear this and you'll just hear a few minutes of it. So, and there's closed caption on this, so you'll be able to see that.
I guess we can start with Lauren since you're closest to me. If you can say what happened.
I went into the gift shop and I saw two monkeys, and I just saw the place was crowded. I didn't think twice, I didn't think about the fact that I was getting off probation in 2 weeks. I didn't think about how stupid it would look if I caught. I just thought it'd be cute if I got one for my girlfriend. And it was crowded, so I picked it up, walked out, and next thing the lady came out. And I didn't come clean at first. So I lied to Regina and Lisa and Renee.
What have you thought about since the incident?
I was thinking about why would I make such a stupid decision being so close to getting off probation and stuff.
Okay. And you mentioned Regina as being affected by your actions, and whom else?
Renee
Renee.
and Lisa.
Okay.
And even Jackie was affected because we were late coming back and she missed her bus.
Anybody else?
My mom. My mom was affected.
How was your mom affected?
I let her down. I was doing so good. She was proud of me and stuff. She was all bragging to my IP counselor how good I've been doing and stuff.
You mentioned that Renee and Regina and Lisa were affected. Can you tell us, okay, how they were affected? Can you tell us how Regina, Renee, and Lisa were affected?
I lied to Lisa directly to her face too. Even when we got back, she asked me, and I was just so scared because I'm just so close to getting off probation, and I really want to get off because I've been on so long.
So Lisa was affected. She felt lied to.
And she was hurt because she trusted
And her.
me.
And Renee, how was she affected?
I lied to her also. She knew I was lying, and I just made it out to everybody that it was just a big misunderstanding. And Renee saw right through it, and I just continued to lie to her. I'm sorry.
And Regina?
Regina too, 'cause she's my counselor. She's my new counselor, and I let her down. We had a really good day besides that beforehand. I think that's what really let her down at the end of the day, because she didn't expect me to do such a thing.
Oh, okay. Andrew?
All right. So I'm going to just stop the share there. And So I was hoping, I hope that you were kind of watching and just seeing and thinking, how could this be helpful to the young person that's speaking, but also to the teachers and counselors and people who are affected, including the young woman that he said missed the bus. And so what I'd like to do is to have a quick kind of triad experience where we can now, all of us can just kind of go into triads and basically just answer that question, your thoughts about how restorative conferences could be helpful after significant harm. So Miles, what do you think about that? About, like, you know, what could be the benefit of using restorative conferences in schools?
Yeah, so I was actually wondering what the outcome of this was after yesterday's session. And, you know, it was interesting to see, like, the boy's perspective on how he said, you know, I didn't really think twice about it, which I was saying to my group how, you know, my personal opinion, and definitely some people probably have different opinions on this, but for like a teenager to be shoplifting, it's probably not super out of the ordinary and doesn't really tell me like, oh, that's a bad person, or, oh, that person's like not making good decisions. Like, obviously it's not a good decision. But it was interesting to see just how he said, I didn't really think twice about it. And, you know, maybe I should have, considering I was coming off of probation. And I just thought that was kind of powerful because, you know, like, in kind of reflecting on that, it seemed as though he learned from the mistake or decision, whatever you want to call it. And so hopefully is able to make better decisions in the future. And I think if he were, you know, to be, if the punishment was more punitive, then maybe he wouldn't have admitted that so thoughtfully and kind of came around to saying it in the way he did. It might have been a different outcome. And yeah.
Yeah, that's great. Well put, Miles. I think you hit it on the head there. Thank you. And then Delilah, can you hear me? Yeah.
Yeah, I can hear you.
What are your thoughts?
I thought it was really cool that he had to like be in the same room of all the people that he affected and kind of explain it about how he affected all of them, like, to their faces. That like took a lot of ownership of the problem, that like, and probably gave him a lot of like empowerment.
Absolutely, Delilah. And I was just at another school district earlier today, and the woman in charge was saying, in some ways, being a part of a restorative conference for a young person is actually harder, you know, than going just go on your suspension, because it really makes you, like you just said, makes you face the people that you harmed. And there's a feeling of shame that comes to you and guilt and stuff. But, you know, when you work through it, it really is transformative. So thank you. And then Laura, what about you? What were your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I liked what was shared, just that, you know, very direct accountability with the audience that was impacted present, and an opportunity to just hear different perspectives as they've evolved over time, in a moment that's a lot calmer than when the initial event took place, because, you know, the amygdala is pretty fired up in that moment when, you know, when it happened. And yeah, for there to be time and space, and then some reflection, and then this public accountability.
Absolutely. Thank you, Laura, for that well thought out response. And so let me now, I'm going to just share the screen, and I'm going to ask Erica, would you read this? I know this is Braithwaite's hypothesis, but just kind of read through what you see there, please.
Separating the deed from the doer. Restorative conferences promotes the act, unacceptable behavior, to be rejected because they failed to meet expectations or standards, while acknowledging the intrinsic worth of the person and their potential contribution to society.
Thank you, Erica. And what does that mean to you? What, I know it's a lot of words and stuff, but what does it mean to you?
I guess, well, I understand, you look at the action rather than the person, and each of us is sum of many parts and not just one action. But the thing that I'm still stuck on is the unacceptable behavior, because that still sounds judgmental to me, which surprises me.
Ah, okay.
I would maybe say like unexpected or unwelcome or something.
That's good. Good point. So by the way, I really welcome all the different thoughts like that, because some people might say, I would prefer saying harmful behavior or something like that. So be thinking of these things. This is what I was hoping people would do. I appreciate that. And the idea is that, really that throughout the whole process, we should always continue to acknowledge the intrinsic worth, right? Their value as a human being, right? Through the whole process, even if sometimes, you can be in a conference sometimes. I've been in one, I remember where a couple of the people really, or actually a few of the people in the circle started feeling like the person who did the harm wasn't showing enough remorse. But I was in that circle and I thought, well, he's young and I don't know, maybe he's nervous and he's not really, understanding. It's not really his job to show all the remorse that you might expect. But he was there, he was present, and he was participating. And so I don't know, I just kind of, like Erica's saying, we have to be careful about our judgments. And then let me ask, is that Dallin? Dallin, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can.
Would you just read through this one? It's kind of like, it's talking about the difference between stigmatizing versus reintegrative shame.
Stigmatizing shame pushes the offender out of the community and labels them. The offender is now a bad person who committed a crime or harm. This label may follow them their whole lives. Since the offender is pushed out of the community, it encourages them to connect to groups outside of school. Reintegrative shame expresses disapproval and holds them accountable without pushing the offender out of the community. This type of shame rejects the act but not the person, and allows for the person to be reintegrated back into the community.
Thank you, Dallin. And I know this is again a lot, but what does it mean to you?
I think this is along the same lines as separating the person from the action. Mm-hmm. If you sort of lump the person with a single action and it's unacceptable, we'll take the judgment from last slide, then they're unacceptable. And obviously that's a really harsh judgment to put onto somebody, and we should just take those actions as actions, really. And that way somebody can stay within that community and be accepted.
That's good. I like it. Thank you, Dallin. And Alonso, what are your thoughts on this?
So I actually brought up an example yesterday where I actually had to apply, the methods of restorative practice in a situation where a student wasn't coming to school. He was about to be SARB'd, and he opened up and was accepted back into the community. He felt he felt like he didn't belong at the school, and so in a way he kind of he was I guess reintegrated as opposed to being stigmatized as another outcast from the community.
That's a great example. I was really impressed that you were able to have that example to give. Thank you for sharing that. And that's our goal with these restorative conferences, is really about reintegrating them back into the into good graces in some ways, in relationship with each other and with the school, with the community. And yet in the process, if you notice, for example, the video clip that you watched, you probably noticed, he did feel some shame. And that's okay. You know what I mean? I don't think it's okay for us to shame somebody, but it's okay for us to feel shame when we do harm to other people. Like as an example, Alonzo, if I did something to harm you, I feel like you didn't deserve that. I should feel some shame about that, right? And so I need to somehow, go through a process to be able to restore our relationship and be accountable and responsible to you. And so that's why I think they use that term reintegrative shame, because they've seen over and over how during the restorative conference process, you'll notice some people feel shame about what they did. And so what they say is, don't be afraid of it. Just you're utilizing it so that they can actually reintegrate back into good relationship with the community. So one thing we're going to do is we're going to go back into a triad share, and we're going to talk about punishment versus restorative accountability, because it's very different. Punishment versus restorative accountability. So, and actually, Alonzo just gave us a really good example of, I think, what would be number 2 on this, right? Provide an example of holding a student accountable that seemed to be helpful for the student. That's what I heard from him, at least, that it was helpful. And then, but I would like you to think number 1 first. It's like, what about an example that you've seen of somebody that was punished and it seemed to do more harm than good? So you might have to kind of think about it a little bit, like either kids you've worked with, or maybe you hung out with them. I don't know. I mean, or it might have even been you, where the punishment seemed to kind of do more damage in some ways, rather than what Alonzo was talking about, like the number 2. So we're going to go now into the triad share and just kind of remember those 2. And Robert, can you help us with this one? All right. Thank you, everybody, for engaging. I mean, my dad had a saying when I was growing up. He would say, "Son, you're only going to get out of it what you put into it." That was kind of a thing I would hear different times in my life, and that definitely is true for this type of a training, right? You're only going to get out of it what you put into it. So it's really dependent on each one of us, our engagement, and so. I want to invite you to, even in the chat, to answer 1 or 2, in a sense. If you remember a time that like the punishment was really harmful to somebody, you can go ahead and put that in the chat. But if you remember a time that it was actually helpful, like when Alonzo had talked about that, it held a student accountable, but it was a good process, and he was able to reintegrate. So, and then while some of you might be, typing in some of your thoughts, I did want to ask Eva, would you be willing to share?
So we just talked about different examples of times where more traditional punishments did not work very well. I shared a story or an experience that I had with a particular student in an undergraduate practicum I did. One person from my group shared, I believe it was a student teaching or like a first-year teaching experience. And then another person in my group shared just, I think, another teaching incident.
All right. Well, thank you. I appreciate it.
Yeah, I actually have questions.
Yes.
What would you do if a student will sell drugs?
We'll actually be seeing, our next video is going to
Okay.
basically be
for that.
a thing like that. Now, a lot of times there's like, mandatory suspensions, things like that, that, students have to go through. And I always feel like, hey, the school administration has to follow ed code. And so, but I always still encourage people, that doesn't mean you can't have a restorative conference. And so what you're going to see in the next video clip is going to be more of this young man was selling marijuana in his school. And he had I think a pound of marijuana in his bag when he was caught. And so he was actually incarcerated, right, in juvenile hall. But when he was going to be coming back to school, that's when they held this restorative conference. So I would definitely always encourage people, you may not be able to control who's going to have to go through this or that on discipline, but I would always still encourage, we want to have these conferences to help to reintegrate these young people. So yeah. But thank you for that question.
Yeah, I had other situation. I was teaching only one period and in one school that would never guess that had this kind of problems. But I had a student also who threatened the teacher death with that. So that's another example that how to integrate back a student who was behaving like this.
Yeah, and that's a very, to threaten somebody, to kill anybody is a criminal act, and so it's very serious, and it can be very traumatic for people. So, that there's going to have criminal ramifications, of course, but then there again, if that student especially is going to, continue at some point to come back to the school and all this, I would definitely suggest to have a restorative conference and to be able to bring that teacher, and the student to talk about how it impacted them. Because a lot of times a student will say something like that and they don't know they're not developed enough in their brain to understand the ramifications of what it's causing, the pain that it's causing that teacher. The restorative conference, part of the restorative conference is to help the young people to hear how it affected the other people so they can actually gain consciousness about, I thought I was just joking or I was just mad at the time, but you know what? You have to be careful because when you threaten to kill somebody, those are serious threats. So those are really important things. Thank you for bringing those up. And I just also want to encourage you to kind of look in the chat because some of your colleagues have kind of written some things out. And I did want to ask Candida, would you be willing to comment on this? Just what were you thinking about this?
Definitely. So Laura and I were chatting about some experiences we've had, me personally having suspended a student from my class and her seeing someone else that maybe wasn't entirely at fault getting suspended, and just how in both of those instances, the party that was being suspended, in my instance, specifically, the person that was coming back from the suspension didn't come in all happy and reformed and excited to be back. So that was just an example of something that was harmful.
Oh yeah, that's a good example. And one of the things that we try to encourage anyone who's doing this work, sometimes if you're a restorative practitioner, sometimes the school will send you a student that needs some restorative justice practices, right? But your job should always be to find a way to bring the teacher, if they were harmed, bring them into the dialogue, right? So that because what you're trying to do is you're trying to mostly restore that teacher and the student, or the student with the student. So just realize that it's good for you to have good conversations with young people, that's very helpful to get them ready to then go have a good conversation with their teacher in those kinds of cases. So thank you for those comments.
Just because this is my first year teaching, but I'm wondering if you do have to suspend somebody, do you send them their schoolwork that they're missing, or do they then also come back upset and behind?
That's a great question. And Mary, I don't know, do you want to try to answer this one?
Hi, Kayla, thanks for asking. Yeah, we definitely do give them an independent study contract. So there's work to complete at home, even though, but we really want to encourage implementing the restorative conferences so that we don't have to suspend.
Awesome. Yeah, that's a lot of, just so people know, oftentimes what schools will do is they'll say, hey, look, this is a suspendable offense, kind of like how Eva was talking about earlier, like you were selling drugs in the bathroom or you threatened somebody. This is a suspendable offense, but we also want you to know that we can reduce the suspension, or sometimes we can eliminate the suspension if you go through this process, because the process is kind of a painful, emotionally painful process to go through, where you have to face the people that you harmed. So I want you to begin to think about what kinds of incentives, right? Because people need incentives to participate in these kinds of activities. So Jamie, you're mentioning when a student with an IEP is suspended. Would you kind of elaborate a little bit on that, Jamie?
Well, as you know, students with IEPs have goals and services attached to their IEPs. And if a student acts out in a way that they would be suspended, we might be missing something for a student to escalate to the point where they get suspended. So it would be a trigger for the case managers to call the team and discuss what's happening with that student, what really is happening, invite the school psych and or a school counselor and say, how else? Because to me, suspension doesn't do any, I mean, the studies I've read on suspensions, having a student sit at home quietly all day, other than giving maybe the other person that they violated a break, it doesn't do a lot for promoting positive behavior when they return, especially if their home is dysfunctional. So it's a time, it's an opportunity for people to step up and say, hey, we need to provide the student with more support. What can we do? Do we need a behavior support plan? Does the student need counseling? Is there something in the behavior or in the disability that we're missing? And if the student is a middle school or high school student, it's a good time to invite that kiddo to the meeting. So there's a lot of aspects to it. It's not mandated by ed code that we have an IEP meeting, but it is a big sign that something's not working. So wow. I wanted to add that it also sort of depends on the student's disability. I mean, obviously, if the student has emotional disabilities or mental health disorders, it's a great time to look at what's happening to that kiddo.
Thank you, Jamie, for that. That was excellent.
Thanks.
And I do want to say, what Jamie was saying in some ways goes for all kids. I mean, you have obviously a lot of kids on IEPs, right? But there's most of the time when you have misbehavior going on, there's something behind it. There's, you might go, oh, well, that kid was selling marijuana or whatever, but then all of a sudden you begin to realize as you get deeper into their story and you talk with them, you talk with their parents, you talk with their mentor, you begin to realize, oh, they're trying to help like their mom pay rent. And, I'm not saying that that's always the case, but I'm saying that it is the case oftentimes that there's other things going on behind the behavior. And the restorative conference, it's not just the conference itself, it's the pre-meetings, like, as you're meeting with the students preparing for the conference, you're finding out all this information, right? And it's really very eye-opening when you do this kind of work. It really can teach you a lot. You may go in with certain assumptions, and if you just ask questions and listen, you like go, oh, okay. And I'm going to just, we're going to go on a break in a minute, but I did want to tell you about that happened to me. Okay. And this was between staff. There was an incident that happened during the shutdown kind of stuff. And so not many people were coming to the school and for some reason, because it had been shut down, I think for almost over a year. And so these two people that were talking, it was early in the morning, they didn't know this person that was coming in and going on to this elevator. And so they were like, oh, good morning, can I help you? And he said, no, I'm good. And he goes, and then they weren't sure, does he work here? And so they said, oh, do you work here? Because he wasn't wearing a lanyard or anything like that. And this guy, he got upset, he goes, of course I work here. And he went up to his office and yeah, I'm blah, 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 I'm Dr. So-and-so. And you got, it became like this thing, and it became a racial thing because he was an African-American man and the other people that asked him weren't. And it was a very strange thing. So when I was called in from the outside as a restorative conference facilitator, when I heard about it, just from a couple of different people that were prepping me, I was like, oh my God, that sounds very racist and blah, blah, blah. And I was, in my mind, I had already made assumptions about it. But when I actually, I actually made the phone calls and we did some Zoom meetings individually with people, I was kind of going, oh, now I'm getting the full picture. A lot of times you just are getting a very, very like small perspective from somebody. And then you begin to go, oh, there's a lot more to this. It's much more complex than when you first start. Just know that. That's recently I did a thing, and it was kind of surprising to me because a child, it was a middle school child, but he had brought a those airsoft guns, and it wasn't loaded or anything, but his friend had painted there has a little tip on it that's red, but he had painted it black so it looked like a real gun. And he went to his friend and he pretended like he was going to kill him. And his friend freaked out because his friend was from a part of Africa where he had kind of already come traumatized by some of the violence there. And so it re-traumatized him, and he just he started shaking, and it was very hard to get over that. And, in my mind, I kind of went in like, God, what a stupid thing to do. It just like seems such a harmful, horrible thing. And honestly, it was, but I couldn't imagine that there was any reason behind it. Like I thought, there's just no reason. But then as I started to investigate and just ask questions, I began to then find out that young man that he did it to, that he had made sexually explicit comments about his sister. And so this young man didn't know what to do with that. He was like, at least where I grew up, there's kind of a feeling that you have to defend your like little brother, your little sister. And here's this young man, he doesn't know what to do. And I'm not trying to justify it. What I'm trying to say is this: there's things behind the actions. So just know, if you're going to do this work, you're going to find those things out if you're open and you just ask questions and you don't go in just judging. So I've come to learn that it's a fascinating, if you're just kind of open, it's really fascinating. You learn so much about people's lives. So we're going to go on our first break. So Robert, if you put up our clock for 5 minutes, go and stretch everybody and we'll see you in 5. Kristen, can you hear me?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you. Would you be willing to read this slide for us, please?
Oh, sure. Needs of harmed people. Opportunity to express emotions. Acknowledgement from loved ones. Assurance. What happened was unfair and undeserved. Offender held accountable. Financial/material restitution. Possible contact with offender. Then going down, apology, questions answered, assurance of safety.
Thank you, Kristen. And Kristen, I know you just read over, but is there anything in this that resonates with you that you feel like maybe harmed people need to, they have these needs to be able to kind of restore in this way?
I guess opportunity to express emotions.
Yeah. It's really needed, right? For people to be able to go through a healing process. Is that kind of what you're talking about?
Yes, absolutely. It's just working through those emotions and, coming to that, resolution is so important.
Yeah. And if people could have the opportunity to learn how to express their emotions and that it's safe, for example, those that work with you, Kristen, and other people here, if they could start to learn hey, it's okay. You're actually encouraged to express your emotions. Maybe they won't just push them down and then try to cover them up by kind of usually with, what do we use? Oftentimes alcohol, drugs, other types, right? Other types of harmful things.
Right.
So thank you for that.
You're welcome.
And then this restorative systems here, can I ask, Mary, would you be willing to read this that says restorative systems?
Sure. If systems are not innately restorative, then they cannot hope to affect change simply by providing an occasional restorative intervention. Restorative practices must be systemic, not situational.
Mary, what does that mean to you? I know it's kind of deep, this is by Ted Wachtel, the IIRP founder, but what does that mean to you?
I just think, if we don't have that system in place, and it has to be authentic, right? We have to have an authentic system in place to be able to enact it, to be able to offer something that's going to change for the better and for future, not just like they say, one and done.
Yes, that's really what it was leading to, Mary. Thank you. And then Jen?
I was just going to say, a lot of times in education, what happens is we get this chunk of money and, we identify a group of kids who needs to be helped. And then we put a Band-Aid on it by launching something. And then a couple of years later, it goes away. And so, systems are important because it suggests longevity, and people have to have confidence in whatever restorative intervention is being put into place. And if there's a history of things coming and going, then it's really hard to get buy-in and for it to be authentic, like you were saying. So I think it's important to have long-term goals and know how this is going to work in your own organization or your institution, and have a plan in place for it going beyond the 2 or 3 or 4 years that the financial support is there.
That's really well said, Jen. Thank you. And it's funny because before coming to this training right now, I was in a meeting this morning with an assistant superintendent, and they definitely want in their district to embrace the restorative practices and restorative justice. And so, I was kind of talking like what Jen was saying. I was saying, well, if you want it to be systemic, it has to be included in your policies, right? And it should really be connected with your LCAP, your your administrative regulations, but also, you want the buy-in, you want the superintendent, you want the board members to buy into this. And then I was saying, like, if you really want this to be sustainable, like Jen is talking about, it really should have, every school should have their own kind of committee that is kind of reminding people about it, and maybe there to help with coaching and maybe a little bit of training or modeling for other new teachers. So it was really cool because they really seemed to be embracing the ideas that Jen was just sharing with us about truly making this systemic. So thank you both to Mary and Jen. And then, so that's kind of what this is about, that they call the MTSS, multi-tiered system of support. If you noticed on the very top of this, within the tier 3 intensive interventions is formal restorative conferencing, what we're talking about today. And what I like is that this is a system of support. It's not a system of punishment. It's a system to support people. So so that the restorative conference really is about reintegrating that young person back into tier 1, really, so that in tier 1, they can get their needs met. And I'm going to be showing you a video in just a couple of minutes, but it's like, you'll kind of hear this young person saying certain things that are going to probably give you signs that he didn't have good relationships with teachers. He didn't have a lot of people on the school that he trusted. He was kind of, in some ways, maybe he had somewhat isolated himself, but what he probably really needed was intensive intervention, and then to be able to find a way that he could get his needs met in the whole school population, in the universal practices in tier 1. So Rosa, can you hear me?
Yes, I could hear you, even if I'm on my call. Yeah. Okay.
And
yes, I agree. There should be long terms rather than short terms, and every school should have their own committee. Absolutely.
All right. Thank you, Rosa. Would you be willing to read this for us, Daphne?
Yeah, sure thing. So for developing restorative systems, all staff trained in implementing restorative practices, relationships and community building is a high priority. Students are developed as restorative leaders. Efforts are intentional, strategic, and consistent. Restorative leadership team gives support and coaching. School data monitored for impact. Circles build connection, trust, and reintegrate offenders. And there's consistent feedback and communication.
That's great, Daphne. Thank you for reading that. And now that you've read it, was there anything that kind of resonated a little bit more deeply with you on this?
I guess I'm just thinking about in terms of, I think it's so important to see this at the school and district level, but then also like teaching this with students, making sure there's transparency that this is not necessarily what, for example, like our criminal justice system looks like, and having an acknowledgement for like when students leave schooling, what the realities might be, whether they are able to become comfortable with these systems within schooling, what the reality is going to be outside for them.
That's a good point. I think it's, especially if you're trying to create that real supportive environment and stuff, it's not always that supportive out in the community. Mm-hmm. So you want to be able to say, hey, this is great and let's keep doing it. But, just know that sometimes out in the community, you're going to face a lot of different ways that people are going to treat you, and just, be prepared for that, right? And give people that ability to have a voice. So thank you. And then Laura, was there anything on this one resonate with you?
Yeah, I love the idea of building a system, as everyone seems to be in agreement on. Students developed as restorative leaders, that definitely stands out to me. I've seen time and again that, the more the practice is inclusive with kind of a lowering of hierarchy, so to speak, and we're all teachers, we're all learners, and everyone has a stake in building community as a leader and as a contributor, the more effective and impactful it can be.
Oh, that's powerful. Thank you, Laura. And I know, I know you believe in it, not just by word, but by action. So thank you. So yeah, think about that, and just, if somebody's ever asking you, I mean, you'll have this slide, we'll send this to you, but just if anyone's ever asking you, well, how can we develop a restorative system? Show them, well, start working on some of these right here, and by the way, relationships and community building has to be a very high priority. If you're just focusing on restorative conferencing and you're not focusing on community building and relationship building, you're really not going to be effective. So just know that. So I'm going to end up showing you now this video. So let me stop the share here for a moment. All right, so this is the one that I was telling you where the young man, he was caught selling drugs on campus and he was incarcerated. So he went to juvenile hall. As this goes on, I really, especially when he's talking, I want you to kind of listen to what he's saying, just the different comments, and then think about like what this one circle has done, for him, maybe even for his family and for the people around in the circle, because everyone is experiencing some form of restoration. And also think of what did it take for the person who organized this, like the amount of work it took him to prepare for this. And I also want you to know this is not what we call a traditional restorative conference. This is what's called a reentry circle, right? Which is really, it's another form of restorative conference. But it's, if you notice, he really puts his own, I guess, twist on it in some ways. So just kind of check it out and let's see what you think.
All eyes is on me. I was like sweating in the hands and stuff. I was like nervous. My mom and my dad was there. It made me feel like walking out the damn room. That's what it made me feel like, dude. I feel like just canceling this and be like, nah, I'm good. It was too much attention.
Good evening. I'm really, really happy to see all of the people here to support my man. And I'm excited about how we're going to make this transition from there to here and beyond. First of all, I don't care about him feeling uncomfortable. I know where that feeling is coming. That feeling is coming from a place where I don't know what's going on here. And this is different. The problem is when a kid doesn't want to be in circle, it's because I don't trust you. So I can't trust that process. So we have more relationship building to do. So Pierre?
I like the quote, self-sufficiency isn't a destination, it is an everlasting journey. Yeah.
This is going to be our talking piece. When you have the talking piece, you're the only one that's talking. But it gives everybody else permission to listen. So the listeners are the most important. We may do a round. So when you were a kid, what you wanted to be when you was little. This kid went through a lot of the same things that I went through when I was a kid. And if not me, definitely somebody that I know. It allows us to empathize when everybody has to answer those questions.
When I was a kid, I always loved working with kids. And so I found the field of school psychology.
And when I was a child, I remember my main thing was wanting to be a cosmetologist.
To be actually still now. I wanted to be a race car driver.
As a kid, I wanted to be a preacher.
When I was a little girl, I really wanted to be a singer.
I just wanted to make my community better.
I've always wanted to be a healer. I think that I'm in the process of doing that now. I always wanted to be happy, and I am.
And when it gets to Cedric, we're all listening for
My name is Cedric.
What makes him like us.
What I want to do when I was a little kid, play football.
It lets the people in circle
know that we're all pretty much the same.
We're here to welcome, support, and navigate him through this school year, and hopefully through the rest of his life. So in this next round, we're going to agree on the things that we need in order to be able to have this conversation.
This talking piece gives everybody else permission to listen deeply. Without values, we're not listening deeply. We're waiting on our opportunity to talk.
If there's a value that you don't agree with, we're going to do another round and say, I don't agree with that value, we'll talk about it. Commitment.
Respect.
Always speak your truth.
Integrity.
Compassion. Honesty.
Forgiveness. Empathy. It's important to be connected. Sensitivity.
Discipline. I started noticing that I wasn't here to stereotype me. I was here to help me and see what was going on in my head. So I started to loosen up a little bit. Self-confidence. Last year I didn't have confidence. I would tell you, I always get kicked out of class for smelling like a pound of weed in class. So I was doing bad last year.
An open heart.
All right. We're going to talk about what do you have to give to support Central. And I want you to talk directly to Central. I'm the person who you can come to any time of day. I am the person who will be your brother, who will be your uncle.
I got your back. I got stuff for you. Come and get it. Especially our kids, study keeping it real. That's their whole life. Who's real, who's not real. And they can tell better than any one of us if you're keeping it real.
And I say this in front of everybody because if I don't, I need all of these people to hold me accountable.
I'm the person that's always going to be honest with you.
I'm the person you can count on. I'm a person you can also just say, hey, I need to talk to you, even if you need that.
But I'm also going to be that person that loves you to death. All right?
And I am the person who's going to ensure that you will get your high school diploma and beyond with your life.
Y'all touched me. Y'all touched me. Y'all made me feel like I can do it.
I'm gonna be the person that reminds you that you can be whatever you want to be.
At first, I couldn't trust them. But then they looked me dead in the eye. They started telling the truth about how they really felt and what they can do. So I was like, okay, I can give them a chance.
I'm the person who you can relate to in school. I'm a person who is also walking the road of success, and I reach my hand out to you. Walking with me.
Can I get all of y'all to do a circle like this for me tomorrow?
The change of the culture begins to form.
So now we're going to talk about needs, which is kind of like the hardest thing that we need to talk about. Whatever your needs are, I don't want you to shy away from them. Let us say no. Don't assume that we're going to say no.
For me, my number one goal is I want him to hear how each one of us are prepared to support him. And I want him to challenge us when he feels like he needs that support that we promised him.
I'm going to need you to be open and fearless because this road to your success is going to be tough. And I will walk through the fire with you, but you got to come with me.
I'm going to need you to have the most confidence in the world where can nobody tell you nothing about your education doesn't come first.
There's never been a situation where everybody in his school life was so concerned about her kids' well-being, and you're going to be the main focus of that circle. She's never been the main focus of nothing, probably.
Whenever you need to talk to somebody and you need that confidence from someone, call them. Anytime. It doesn't matter.
I never listened to my mom like that. So
I need you to, grow to be a man who you want to follow from. That's what I need from you. Because sometimes when I ask you, I need some help. And when you feel when I say I need you, you look at me sometimes and give me a head nod. I'm like, no, talk to me. Talk to me. Because I don't know what's on your mind.
I was like, I do have to start talking to him more because I just go out and do whatever I want. I do stuff like my father was supposed to do. Like, I was peer pressured to do all the stuff I was doing. I just did it because my family needed
I'd
it.
rather not pass on any time being around you. I just want you to grow and understand who you are. Thank you.
I just need to keep myself motivated. But I know I can do it, I just don't be motivated.
Everybody in this room got your back.
I'm gonna pause it there. Just I wanted you to see kind of the main part of it. You'll have access to this, but you definitely get the feel for what the process is there, right? Of trying to welcome him back into the school after he did what he did, and so it kind of like, speaks a little bit to what Eva brought up earlier about he was selling drugs on his campus. He had to go do some time, but he came back to the campus. And what I appreciate was the school wanted to embrace him. Because I've had other schools sometimes, they kind of make all these excuses of why that child can't come back into their school. And they kind of put roadblocks there, right? And so I really appreciate this school because they said, hey, if we're going to take this young person back, we have to rally around him, right? We have to show him something different, because if it's just the same old thing, he's going to have the same old problems, But if young people are going to change, we have to change. Things around him have to change. These are young people. They just don't change out of thin air. I mean, we are the ones that should be models for the change that we want to see in him. So I really, really liked it, and I hope that I hope that you have a chance to really just reflect on it a little bit, and I'm wondering, maybe, we should give people a chance to even just do a quick triad, Robert, just because I realize probably people need a chance just to kind of reflect and kind of let people know what they think. I would say, if you can, just try to identify and remember, what did that circle do to serve to restore or heal the youth and the adults in the circle? All right. Thank you, everybody, for just, engaging and doing what you're doing. And so, Julie Downing, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
And so what kind of was your reaction to that video?
Personally, I thought it was awesome. I was telling my group that to me, it seemed like this was the first time that this student had not only experienced so many adults caring about him, but probably the first time he really heard his mom. I mean, he even said, I never heard my mom saying stuff like that. And it's obvious that she loves him and that she cares, right? But, as that's what I was saying in the group too, is that I think a lot of times parents, teachers, we all tend to forget to tell kids that they're important to us, to tell kids that we're there for them. We get really caught up in the day-to-day of making sure they're doing exactly what they need to do and keeping them in line and all of that kind of stuff. And we forget that they're people with emotions and they need to, have that support.
Wow, that's very well said, Julie. Thank you. Appreciate your comments. And Mercedes, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Sorry about that.
Yeah, no problem. So what was your reaction to that?
I think it spoke to the power of the restorative practices really being around consistency. You see the really kind of that all in for a student, and it's not just a situational kind of one and done, but there's a buy-in that's going to extend beyond the time that is going to be in, that we saw. And I think that that's really powerful. And I think sometimes I as we think about our different systems in our elementary, middle, and high school levels, where might that be happening with really with fidelity to really be able to affect change for kids, you know? So that's what it made me think about.
That's powerful. And Mercedes, one of the things that just seeing you, because I know you and I know you're from, Poway, and I really appreciate you and the work that you do. And but I participated in a restorative conference in your district, and it was so cool to see that they had the school principal was there, a teacher was there, another principal was there from the comprehensive school, a district representative was there, a community person was there, a law enforcement was there, and this young man who had made a really, a bad choice, and had, kind of made a threat online. And so, law enforcement was involved and stuff, but how your district came together was amazing. And to me, I thought, like when how we use that 1 through 10 scale, I would say now that one was a 10, because of the way the school system came together, and this young man, he was remorseful and stuff, and he did what he needed to do, and I think he learned what he needed to learn. But I just thought, wow, if that wasn't one of the best restorative conferences I've ever been a part of, it was amazing. So thank you.
Thank you.
And then I wanted to give Jennifer Calderon any comments, any reactions?
No, I did think it was great to see that circle, and I was telling my group just what a great experience to have a student reentering in that way versus, either people not knowing or knowing and not having the opportunity to connect and show support for them.
Absolutely. Thank you, Jennifer. So, you've heard me say some of the situations where it worked. There have been some difficult things that I've seen where, a kid, even in the community, he's obviously a student somewhere, but in the community, he brandished a knife. It was partly because, this man came at a park and asked the kids to calm down because he was having his daughter's first or second birthday party in this little part of the park. And these boys were kind of, going a little bit wild. And so when he went over there, I think one of the kids wanted to, show off and scare him. And he brandished a knife at him. But that was when his wife and some of his family had come out and they saw it and they thought he was going to be killed. And it was just very traumatic. And so law enforcement got involved, but that was a very, very powerful restorative conference. It was one of those ones where there was something happened in it that I hadn't seen before. I hadn't seen it since either, but the guy who he brandished the knife to, when they came up, usually in a restorative conference towards the end, you're asking for almost like a restorative plan, that you are suggesting. So he suggested that young man go to church with him. And I remember I kind of stepped back and I was like, what's going on here? Because I'm not used to this in this kind of a setting. And so I was just trying to see how it was all going to be handled. And but he said, mostly, I want you to come and meet my family, and I want you to come and have lunch afterwards with my family. I want you to know who we are, and and we want to know who you are. I was really kind of impressed. And this man that he suffered like that had decided to go above and beyond, and really wanted to mentor this young man. So there's just amazing things, that you can use this for. Another thing I wanted to tell you was at a high school, I was a part of a very large restorative conference, and it was sad because I knew the principal quite well, and And for whatever reason, these kids, they got together and they were having some kind of, I don't know if it was senior prank or something like that. It was kind of getting close to graduation. And a couple of the kids, I think mainly one of them, but this group of kids that were doing this, you know, they were partying, and then they started to spray paint some of the walls on the school, and he used like the N-word, because my friend is a African-American man, and then did that, you know, kind of the picture of the noose and all that stuff. And I was like, oh my goodness, I couldn't believe that happened. And so I was wondering how this was going to go, because so many young people were the offenders. They were all kind of lumped together because they were all in some ways participant in that. And it actually, you know, in some ways that went well, but I want to tell you something just to kind of warn you, because, you know, usually what you do is you offer an incentive to young people to participate in the restorative conference. There's got to be some kind of an incentive, right, for them to do this. Sometimes it's like, oh, well, you know, we're going to cut back on the days of your suspension, or we're not going to expel you, or something like that. Well, with these kids, they were not going to let them walk on for graduation. They were going to basically not going to be able to walk at all. And so the principal he didn't promise them, but he said, I'm going to, you know, do my best to try to get you, if you go through this, I'm going to do my best to get you to walk during graduation. And they all were into it, and they bought in. They had written out their apologies, and it was like quite beautiful, honestly. But the reason why I'm kind of warning you is because it was such an event that affected the community, that then the board members got involved because they had received so much media and all this stuff. And so the board kind of overruled the principal and didn't allow him to allow those kids to walk, because it became a political issue. And I felt bad for the principal, and I felt bad for the young people, because he offered that in some ways. Now, he didn't promise, he offered that he's going to try, and he wasn't able to do it. So I felt really bad for, you know, for people involved in it. So I just want you to know that if you're going to offer an incentive, you better be sure that you can follow through with it. Because it's a lot of that's involved with these young people coming and admitting and publicly, you know, kind of feeling that shame and going through it and all that. So it wasn't that it was worthless, believe me, but you got to be careful of that one aspect of what you're going to offer. So, all right. So what I want to ask you is this: if you could name one offense that you think would be like appropriate for a restorative conference. And by the way, it's not going to be like, oh, they stole the sucker off the teacher's table. That's not appropriate for a restorative conference, okay? A restorative conference is about kind of more severe harm, okay? It's not like a restorative conversation. Yeah, you're going to have a restorative conversation with this kid who stole the sucker off the teacher's desk or something, but not a restorative conference. So what I want to ask you is this: what, in your opinion, what kinds of offenses, like give me an example of an offense that you think would be appropriate for a restorative conference in your world where you are? And then you go and put that in the chat. Thank you, Julie, for, she already says a student threatening another student or teacher. Perfect, right? And Julie, I also want to ask you this: what might be an incentive that you would offer, especially the person, maybe both of them, but mainly the person who did the harm? What kind of incentive would you offer that student so that they would participate? And then, so if you would just kind of do both of those, an appropriate thing that you think that would be good for a conference, and routine misbehaviors suddenly emerging from a student. Depends on what those misbehaviors were, right? If they were kind of really harmful and something, yes, I would definitely say yes, because now they became a routine and there was something that needs to be addressed in a restorative conference. And then I'm going to ask you, Andy, what would be something that could be offered as an incentive? And then Julie says, perhaps lessening the suspension, if that was enacted. Good. Outbursts in the classrooms. Usually an outburst in the classroom is not going to be deemed as something for a restorative conference, unless the outburst was so harmful. Just so you know that, because the only reason I'm saying this to you is because there's a lot of work that goes along. It's a lot of hours, a lot of time. It's talking to a lot of different people to get people on board for these things. Attendance drop combined with grades going down. That definitely, I would say an attendance drop combined with grades going down would be a definite restorative conversation, right? Where you might bring parents in, you might bring a teacher, but you don't have to go through the whole list of questions like you would in a restorative conference. So just so you know, that's what I'm just trying to get you to see the difference between harm and severe harm. A physical fight between students. There you go, right? So now you might want to have that restorative conference. And some people say, yeah, because that kid needs to, fess up to what they did, but also the one who might have, maybe he was beat up. That kid really needs that restorative conference because then he can say how he was impacted. And he wants to be able to hear that it's going to be safe for him to return back to school and things like this. It's a lot of times the victim carries with them like trauma afterwards, and then they're afraid and they can really learn that it's okay now to go back to school. These are good. Okay, good. So a physical confrontation between students. The outburst, okay, scared the other students. Good. Severe bullying. And so, yeah, with bullying, yeah, you can definitely use that kind of restorative conference, but you definitely also want to make sure that you have the supports in place to be able to make sure, like if that there's going to be safety for the child who was burdened by that afterwards. So just kind of, this is good because it's really going to get you to think about what might you use this for? Truancy and frequent attempts to leave school. Yeah. And then being disrespectful to teachers and students, if it's definitely to that level where you feel like it's very, very harmful. So primarily considering that they feel unheard or have had no one to talk to about something going on in their personal life, simply lending an ear may improve this, but offering various coping mechanisms would be my first consideration. Good. There you go. Sometimes just lending an ear, having a restorative conversation is enough. Now, you may then at some point feel like, wow, this deems like I really need to go and this needs to be a full-on conference where I bring, maybe there's 8 people in there and it's kind of intense. So what are my thoughts about leveraging punishments as incentives? It's counter to the philosophy of restorative justice, but it also seems tough to do anything else. Yeah, I know what you mean. So the reality is though, I want you to know that even though there's restorative justice, restorative practices, it doesn't mean that there are not consequences. So, kids are going to receive consequences. There's still kids are going to be, suspended, expelled. They're going to be, having to deal with some consequences. This is not in place of all of that. It's really because what we realized was those consequences by themselves are typically not that helpful. And so what we do is we want to put in an educational experience through a restorative conference and restorative conversations as a part of those things. Because, something that would be a negative would be to say, somebody does something really severely harmful and we're like, hey, we're just going to have a conference with you and everything's okay. No, it's not okay. You harmed people. You broke public property. You did things like that. You're going to need to have consequences. But it may be this, that through the restorative conference you realize the best thing for this child isn't to be suspended, right? Isn't to just be sent home. So think of, there's so much to think about, and thank you all for your comments on this. I want to take a quick break because it's 3:00 and want to kind of give like 5 minutes, and then we'll come back and we'll kind of go into our last section. This is what I've noticed now in my experience, and many other facilitators have experienced this. Effective preparation for a restorative conference will typically determine if your conference runs smoothly with positive outcomes. Poor preparation oftentimes produces more harm in the conference. So just be aware of that. The times that I've seen things go sideways, and I've talked to I talked to myself one time because I did something that was not smart and I didn't prepare well and it didn't go well. But I've had to talk to some other facilitators and be like, hey, what happened there? And they were like, well, I really didn't have a chance to meet with that person before I brought them in, or, I only had a quick conversation. I really needed to spend more time. So really what everyone has told me, it's usually the preparation that was off. And so when you think of a process, it's really about the offender talks about the incident, right? Others, including the person who was harmed, relate how they have been affected, including like the supporters that person who did the harm. They're allowed to bring in like their parent or a supporter. And so they also say how they've been affected. And then participants decide how to repair the harm. And that's what's called the agreement phase. And then breaking the bread is kind of like after you're done with everything, then you have like a little bit of snacks and you just kind of have a little time to just, I don't want to say have fun, but just release and just kind of like, drink some water and have a few snacks. Now I want to go over the script with you that's put out by the International Institute for Restorative Practices. They have a script and they're pretty strict about it, but I want you to read over this script. And so, Robert, what's the best way for us to do that?
Here we go. So it'll be linked in the chat box.
So if you don't mind, click on the link that Robert has shared in the chat box, open that up, and you're going to see like 3 to 4 pages, and they literally provide you a script, for the people that, just want to like almost like read off of a script for their conference. That's okay. I've seen that happen. As long as you do it and you're kind of still personable, like it can work. But most of the people that I've worked with, they kind of use this script that you see, they use that as a template, and then they create their own script, their own guide. They create an agenda. So I'm going to give you a few minutes to look over that, and then we'll talk about it. All right, Andy, what's your thought on this script?
So I really like the idea of having something prepared like this, because I feel like I don't like, kind of like an interview. I wish they would let me have this on the interview. But it gives me like something to prepare myself for a conversation that could go in so many different directions. I mean, when you kind of open up emotions, you have no idea where it's going to go. And I'm not to say that you can't flex away from this, but what it does for me is, say we do drift off after we talk about the section 1 on here, for example, it allows me to get to section 2, section 3. I just think that having something prepared like this. With that being said, though, I do think there has to be flexibility if, like, you're having that conference and you're in a very emotional place, you maybe stay focused on what's making progress and not be like, okay, actually, we're done with that now. We'll talk about number 3.
Yeah.
I really love the idea of having something prepared, but I do think that you can't just be a stickler you have to adapt whatever it is to that person's needs or how that conversation goes.
That's really, really well put, Andy. Thank you so much. Because,
absolutely.
That really is helpful to hear the way you put that, is like to have this as a guide for yourself. It can really take you through the different steps, and you can veer off if you need to, but it can really bring you back. And just so you know, like when you're asking the questions that you see there, sometimes you'll ask like a question, and then you notice that the person already starts to answer the next question you were going to ask them, and that's okay.
If you don't mind me interjecting farther, sure. That's actually exactly what I do as a person. I do a lot of conversations with the restorative practice with my partner and just like in my personal life, because I think it's good to have somebody make you talk. And ironically, I'm the person, as you can tell, just based on how I'm expressing my voice right now, I will go on and on. So typically someone asks me question 1 and I've already answered question 1, 4, and 6. I absolutely attest that you are right on that as well.
And so, Andy, if you're the facilitator, it's okay for you to say, you get to that next question, you're saying, hey, I think you already answered this question, but is there anything you wanted to add to this? Or, you can do it that way. That's where a facilitator begins to kind of be flexible with, okay, everything's not following like a scripted kind of like order. Sometimes people will go off, and then you have to make a decision. How do I want to?
Exactly, because if you're not malleable to the script, then it's going to be a script, and whoever is a part of it's going to feel like it's a script, won't feel authentic.
Absolutely. Thank you, Andy.
Absolutely.
So what do you think, Brittany, of the script?
So I like the script. I like the format. Like what was said earlier, it gives a lot of it allows for a lot of flexibility, and it gives leeway because you really don't know how the conversation is going to go. I really like how there's a lot of collaboration involved, and it gives everybody a chance to participate. Nobody's really left out. And it kind of forces everyone into hearing what the other person has to say. So you're going to have to step out of your comfort zone, and you're going to have to listen to other people's perspectives.
God, that's really, really well said, Brittany. Thank you. Yeah, I think you're exactly right. I've noticed that this kind of a script or agenda makes sure that everybody gets a chance. They all get a chance, and everybody gets a chance to listen and learn from everybody. All right, let's move on. But I'm glad to hear that at least it was helpful for you all to be thinking about the script, and you'll all get that, and you can use it however you want. And
I have a question about it.
Yes, please.
So I appreciate allowing everyone to speak, and obviously that is best practices. And what do you do about the people who go on and on and on and on and on, and how do you corral that?
Yeah, and you may want to within your community agreements that you go over in the beginning, you may actually say what do they call that? Share the air or speak just enough, or the times where I've had that happen, what I do is I kind of, unfortunately, I'll kind of look for when they're taking a breath, and I'll say, hey, thank you very much for your sharing. That really was helpful. And we need to move on now, but it's kind of, I don't want to hurt their feelings. I don't want to, you know what I mean? But I understand as the facilitator, it's my role to make sure that everyone's going to get a chance. And that's one of the things that I noticed is that as part of doing this, you're also kind of watching the time, because every one of these that I've been a part of, it has a certain amount of time limit, right? If you're at a school, for example, sometimes they're like, well, you can use the room for like 2 hours, but then we got something else coming up, or, and so, by the way, you can actually do these online. You can do this via Zoom. I've done it, and for some fairly serious things. And it's surprising, as long as you do the prep work, you can do this. And just for that question, by the way, what I noticed is most people will kind of catch themselves if they're going on and on. But sometimes what I notice is people tend to kind of just say enough, and then you can move on. But you can always just do what I was saying. Just kind of break in for a moment. Say, hey, thanks so much for that. That was great, and we need to move on. Just to kind of get things going. So these are the combined questions that we went over yesterday, and so you may like the questions the way they're laid out here, but some people are like, well, with the people who were harmed and the people who did the harm, I like to use these combined questions, just the same ones for them. But if you noticed, when you're talking about the supporters, these questions might not be as useful. So you might want to use exactly the supporter questions from this script. So this is kind of like, just so you know, this is kind of like the homework that a facilitator has to do. They have to kind of go through and sort of look, are these the questions that I want or not want? Do I want to do this? And you tweak and you change. And if you notice the first video that we saw, they followed this certain format that I'm going to show you in a minute of the seating chart. But the next video that I'm going to show you, they did not follow it, right? So they switched it like the other way around, but that's partly because they had two facilitators. And just so you know, some people really prefer having two facilitators. I've done it both. I've done it by myself and I've done it with other people. So if you're with somebody, you have to coordinate everything, right? You have to say, okay, you ask these questions of this person, and then I'll ask these questions, and then you go back to that, and I'll go. So you just have to make sure you have everything set up and coordinated. You don't want to wait until the 5 minutes before. You want to kind of get things really done well. So these preparations, I'm hoping you were kind of looking at them. The preparations are really, really important, right? And so we usually give kind of deference to kind of the person who is, in quotes, the victim, the one who was harmed, to make it easier for them, whether that be location, time, day, but you want it also large enough. And during COVID, you may have to kind of be under that consideration is, okay, are we gonna wear masks if we're indoors? Or am I gonna have them 3 feet apart, 6 feet, whatever you have to follow the protocols of your school. I mean, you have to remember all that. And so just think about these things that you see here, who you're going to be inviting. Like people might say, well, yeah, I want my friend to come because I want them to be a supporter. Well, you want to make sure I talk with them first. You don't want to just let anybody in. And by the way, sometimes you're going to run into situations where certain people need an interpreter, right? They need somebody to translate for them. Or I've done it also where somebody needed a hand sign, like doing like American Sign interpretation because a person was deaf. So you have to be thinking about those things when you go into this, and then and make the call on it. You want to be familiar with the script, right? And we say like have name tags. We'll send you like an agreement form with the stuff we're going to be sending you, just so it's like a form that's kind of easily filled out, because what you're doing as a facilitator, and this is why people like to have two facilitators. if I'm the main facilitator, my partner is taking notes, because what you're trying to do is, first of all, you're taking notes of the main issues that are coming up. And then later on, as you're coming up with the kind of the restorative plan, you're coming up with, okay, what are people asking them to do? Because I've had some where, they're asking them like, oh, well, they need to go to, drug and alcohol rehabilitation. I think they should go to like 6 sessions, and I think they should go to therapy. I think, so like people put up all these kinds of recommendations, and you need to be able to put those. First of all, you have them on a note paper, and then when you find out what everybody agrees on, then you transfer that over to the actual agreement form, right? So first it's notes, but what happens is sometimes, like, you'll be in the situation where within your notes it says, oh, they're supposed to go to this after school program and blah blah blah, and then you find out, like, when you put it out there, okay, is that going to be okay with you to do? Because you're always checking to make sure. And they say, well, I have a job after school, I can't go to that. And then you say, okay, so you understand they have a job, they're not going to be able to make it. The person says, oh, it's fine. So like you're kind of giving and taking, right? Because you have to check with people right there in your circle. And it says provide refreshments for after the conference. It's always a good idea. I found that to be really helpful. This is kind of like a typical seating plan, where, like, if you're the facilitator, that's right there that you can see in bold. Like the way I've done it most of the time when I set it up, it's like, the primary, like the offender is sitting where you see where it says offender to my right, but the primary offender supporter is right in between us. And then if they have another supporter, they're right by them. And on the other side is in quotes, the victim or the person that was harmed. And then there's their primary supporter, and then another supporter. That's if they call on them. Sometimes people are like, oh, I just want my dad to come. That's it. All right, that's fine. Or, I just want my mom, or I just want my aunt, or people can decide who they want. But the reason why it's good for you to decide, you don't have to follow that. You could switch them up, you could do whatever, but what you want to do is you want to get comfortable with a certain type of like a format for you, because you're trying to remember a lot, right? You're going, okay, I'm talking to the primary offender supporter now, so who's going to come after that, and who, you know what I mean? So it's good when you have things set up that makes it easier for you. So just know this, this is only a 3-hour training. So this is just kind of in some ways, getting you familiar with some of this. You're going to have to do your own homework. You're going to have to follow up on stuff and read about things, and maybe even practice with colleagues. That usually when I've had the 2-day these trainings, because they used to allow me to do face-to-face, the 2-day trainings, I could do like role plays with stuff, and I could have people practice with the script, without the script, if they wanted to try that. So now it's on you. You're going to have to develop ways to do this with colleagues, if it's something you're really interested in. So now I want to show you another clip, and you're going to see in this clip, you're going to see that they didn't follow this, like, because the main facilitator, when you're looking at it, it's kind of like it's just different. There's 2 facilitators, and one of the facilitators sits on the other side. So so let me just show you what this looks like. And this is in a high school, and it's and there's some LGBTQ issues that come up. There's some racial issues that come up. And I just want you to see how the facilitator kind of is asking questions and trying to get people to be authentic. Okay. So she's going to be asking somebody that would be considered, in this case, the offender. If you notice, the offender in this case is sitting to her left.
As possible. So nothing that we share here will be held against us outside of this space. It's really just to be as open, as honest as possible. So the one caveat to the confidentiality form is mandatory reporting. So Derek, if you can share with us what happened and what you can take responsibility for.
So, one day we were in class and David was talking to somebody else, not me. And, he was talking about sports. So I kind of chimed in, I jumped in the conversation and I said, what do you know about sports? And I called him a derogatory name, but.
What did you call him?
I said he was gay. And I didn't really mean nothing by it at first. I mean, it's a joke. Everybody laughed. But now I see that that was wrong. And that can be really hurtful to somebody. So I didn't really think nothing of it at the time. He didn't really say nothing. And, we went on with our day. Later on in the week, I saw him and I, kind of bumped into him a little bit. And I called him another derogatory name.
What was that name?
I called him a faggot. And after that, I think we ran into each other one more time. And maybe he was fed up with me kind of bothering him. So we got into a little bit of a heated argument. I said some things, he said some things. And I just got really mad at some of the words and stuff he was saying about me. So I just beat him up. That's it.
And Derek, how did that main incident start? You said you beat him up. But can you give us a little more detail about that?
Yeah, I was kind of messing with him in the locker room and stuff. I said, you probably do like to play football with boys, huh? And, I think that kind of was the last straw for him. Because then he said something about me being black. And, he said some derogatory terms towards me being black. And I just got furious and I just took off on him. Meaning I started hitting him.
How are you feeling at the time when all of that was happening?
I guess I knew it was wrong, but at the time, you don't really think about being wrong or really reflecting on what I was doing. I wasn't really thinking, just kind of doing something just to do it. And then, when he said those things about me, I couldn't stand it, And that's when I really just wasn't thinking, because I was angry.
Thank you, Derek.
David, would you like to share your perspective of the incident?
One of my friends were talking about football, the game that just happened recently. And then Derek came in, was like, what do you know about football, You're gay. And so, everybody else is laughing, but for me, that kind of hurt. And I was thinking about it a bit, and then later on in the week, I'm walking down, and then he bumped me, threw another derogatory word my way. And then a little bit later, we was kind of fed up with everything. And so, we were in the locker room, and we're just doing our thing, whatever. And then he said something, and then I threw a racial slur at him. And then
David, what was that?
I called him a monkey. And then also said a couple other words throughout when we were throwing words at each other. So there was that too. And then, I don't know, I kind of just lost it because I'm done with being picked on, and I always have been. So there was that too.
And how were you feeling at that time?
At the time, I don't know, I kind of just blanked out a bit, and it was just rage, really. Kind of just blacked out. And just kind of, that's about it. I think one of us threw a punch, and then from there, it escalated to a fight in general.
He feels uncomfortable because he's never done this before. And I just feel like, yeah, like I'm disappointed that he said that, especially because I always talk to him about culture and respecting other people's cultures. But at this point, it's like, I can just imagine why he did that. He was tired of being bullied. He's been bullied like since he was elementary. And yeah, it wasn't right for him to fight back. At the same time, who was he gonna tell? And I'm shocked that he didn't tell me, because I always thought we had a good relationship. And now I'm thinking that it was my fault because I wasn't with him, I wasn't talking to him, and I'm busy in school, working 2 jobs. My mom's in the hospital. Something could have gone really bad that day.
Esmeralda, what was your experience like that day, like when you heard about what happened to David?
When I got a call from the vice principal, I was scared. I was scared that he was seriously injured because he wasn't really telling me a lot over the phone. And so when I went to pick him up, I was just worried, like, what happened to him?
Mom, what was your experience that day? You touched on it a little bit, but, the first time that you heard about this was when Derek came home that day?
Well, no, I got a phone call first from the school, from Mr. Cooper, that he had been involved in a fight. And as parents, you immediately jump to, well, what did somebody do to him? But then I had to just step back and realize that I know my son's been struggling. I know he's been unhappy and he's been angry about the relationship, with his father. So for me, it just felt like deja vu. His dad went to prison for something that I told him we should not, he should not be involved in. We should not be participating in, but he felt like for a short period of time he can get his hustle on and then we can come out of our situation. So finally, he's out and we're trying to get reestablished, and then he jumps into something. So it was like, man, law enforcement. I was tired of it, and I was hurt, and I was disappointed.
What about you, Mr. Johnson? What was that day like for you when you heard about it?
I was, definitely disappointed and whatnot. But, Derek, he's a good kid. He's he tries to stay on top of his studies and, and do the right thing for the most part. And truthfully, I know a lot of his struggles is because of me, and I've been trying to reconnect with him and let him know that I'm here, but it's, he's had to step up, and be the man in the house for a while, and now that I'm back, I know it's kind of difficult for him, trying to do stuff. And
all right, so I'm going to pause it there, and then just because of time. And I think, what I would like to do, just because I think after you watch something like that, it's a good idea to have a chance to just debrief a little bit with a couple of colleagues. So maybe we should do a triad and just allow people to, maybe 5 or 6 minutes where they could really just say, what did I see there? What was going on? And if you notice, they weren't following a strict script like you may have just read. So that's why I kind of wanted you to see a different model. People that don't necessarily want to follow that script, but they kind of created their own questions, and that's okay. You're going to do what you want to do as well. So if you would, though, just to go in, maybe like 5 minutes, if that's okay, Robert, for triads. We just don't have too much time. I wish I could give you a lot more time to debrief that and stuff, but I want to ask, Erica, can you hear me?
Yeah, I was saying in my group as a social worker, I'm like, oh, everything will work out. People will be vulnerable, and then you see this video where they, as one of our participants was saying, kind of guilt tripping each other a bit, like, well, my kid's perfect and yours is not, and like that. So I have to prepare myself for that.
Yeah, good point. Thank you. And Tracy, can you hear me?
Yes.
And what was your kind of how did you see that? Anything resonate with you in that video?
Yeah, I found it interesting, when the young gentleman was asked, what did you do? And he said, he said something like an unkind word kind of thing, a derogatory name. He didn't want to say. And then the fact that she asked him and actually make him say it again, I was like, wow.
Yeah. So by the way, Tracy, you're going to be, you've got, like, if you're the facilitator, you're going to be kind of like, do I ask him to clarify?
Right.
And that's really, every one of you are going to have to make those kinds of choices, because sometimes people will say something very vague, and then you're like, well, we need to know, what did you say? It's important. But so, yeah, just know it can get a little uncomfortable like that.
Yes, it definitely got uncomfortable once he had to repeat. I could tell, like, he felt very uncomfortable.
Yeah.
So
thank you. Appreciate it. What about you, Miles? What was your kind of, anything resonate with you on that?
Yeah, we were talking about how there was a sense of animosity still between the two sides. And we talked about how they had them repeat the terms, and we were wondering if that was like an effective strategy or not. I mean, one person mentioned, maybe reopening some old wounds, but then again, that's what you're confronting. So we thought it was a little tricky situation, and of course, that's the reality of, these are tricky situations, and you want to approach them lightly, and you also want to confront things that were done that harmed people in order to really like move forward from them. So definitely, maybe not a clean resolution was settled upon in our group, but we kind of talked about that.
All right. Well, thank you, Miles. And by the way, I noticed some comments in the chat, and you may want to go back after you get the. You'll see there's a link that you could watch the whole thing, right? So that you can kind of go, oh, okay, now I see, because they did have like the people that ran the LGBTQIA group at the high school, they were in the circle, and they offered resources, and I think, at least from what I can remember, I think I can't remember his name now, the African-American young man, I think even he agreed to go to one of their meetings or something to kind of grow in understanding and stuff. So it's just kind of like it's interesting what can be brought out when it comes to you guys like kind of developing that rehabilitation plan. What's going to be best, and what are the resources that we have that are available. So yeah, just think about it. And what we're going to do is we're going to send you, the different documents that will help you, that you can kind of look and see what you think of that. Even like an agreement page that you would be able to, like a blank one that has different, just a little bit of what would you call it? Kind of like a template that you can use to develop your agreements, because you're going to have to write out some things. And it's nice to have a form like that. So just some tools. And we know that, look, this is 3 hours. And so we don't expect you to go, oh, okay, I'm an expert now, I can go out and just do this. You're going to need support from each other, but also from us. So feel free to reach out. This is just like a limited amount of time. And, we appreciate the fact that you're even here, because it's saying, hey, I want to learn about this. I want to kind of see if maybe I might be able to do this work. And most of the time when I've had these trainings in the past, like I've said, it's usually 2 days face-to-face, and you have plenty of time to practice. And even then, not everybody felt comfortable afterwards to hold restorative conferences. So it's okay. Don't worry. Maybe what would be helpful is maybe you might want to do it with somebody, right? That's something that helped me in the beginning. So you just think of those things. You might want to start small with lower level offenses, right? In the beginning, consider using a co-facilitator. You might not, don't go right into like super serious offenses involving severe trauma for victims without appropriate experience. And then discuss and plan with leadership how best to implement both informal and formal restorative conferences as an alternative to typical discipline. And by the way, I like that they bring that up here, because some of you, in some of the things that you listed out, I would think, yeah, that sounds like kind of like an informal conference, right? And that's fine. Do those. Do informal conferences for things that come up that aren't like super serious, but you might want to start with some of those things and ask questions and get used to these things. Provide follow-up to participants of restorative conferences to assure longer term success. If that's what I noticed, if you definitely want to have a plan, and then you want to see who's going to follow up with that, right? Because it's easy to put something on a piece of paper, but you got to put somebody's name on there, like who's going to make sure that they get to that service and who's going to do this. So yeah, definitely those things are really, really important. So one of the things is maybe what we could do is just, if you feel like you have a few minutes, to just put one takeaway, right? Just might have been a video you saw or something a conversation that you had in your small groups or something that we talked about. Just one takeaway is a good way to do a closing circle. And then, yeah, we'll be pretty much done. And there is a good resource in the community called the National Conflict Resolution Center. They actually run a lot of community conferencing in San Diego, and now they're kind of expanding out to the North County. So they are quite good. I've attended and helped with some of their conferences. So just kind of look at some of these comments, if you don't mind, just kind of like see what people are saying here. Students need to feel safe to be able to be successful. Right on. Thank you for all these comments. I so appreciate the richness that all of you, by putting things in like this, it just creates a much richer experience. Definitely restorative solutions are more effective than punitive solutions, that's for sure. And just know that you saw only a portion of those videos, okay? So yeah, just know that like a lot of facilitators, what they do is they open up with something kind of like to kind of just ease people in, right? They don't just jump in. Some people do a mindfulness activity as well. All right, well, we appreciate you all, and thank you, for those of you who filled out the evaluation, but hopefully we'll see you either at another training or via email, or who knows, maybe we'll see you face to face sometime soon. So take care and have a great rest of your Thursday.